The Minnesota Vikings are 0-3 on the season after a loss to the Los Angeles Chargers. This is a far cry from where they finished the 2022 regular season, as they would go on to win 13 games, win the division, and go 11-0 in one-score games, in the regular season that is. They were one and done in the postseason with a one-score loss to the Giants, and are now 0-3 to start the 2023 regular season with, you guessed it, 3 one-score losses. And this is extremely worrisome, not just because of an 0-3 record, but because of how this roster is constructed, where the team is inevitably headed, and due to decisions that have been made by both the front office and coaching staff in the past. And in today's video, we're going to dive into why the Minnesota Vikings' future is frightening. And there's a lot to dive into because it's not just an 0-3 panic button and the season is over. We're going to dive into Kevin O'Connell, Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson, and more, and there is a ton to dive into in today's video, and with that preface out of the way, let's begin. And we are starting today's video by discussing why the Vikings are 0-3, and a lot of it boils down to turnovers. There's been 3 games played in 2023, and there's been 3 games with multiple turnovers. Not surprisingly, the Vikings rank dead last in the league with just 9 turnovers in 3 games, and when you only force 2 turnovers defensively in 3 games to the 9 you've committed offensively, the results are naturally not going to be in your favor. And while the Vikings in theory could be 2-1, as I do think giving up 259 rushing yards to the Eagles and getting bullied the way they were in that game was an inevitable loss, this doesn't change how dim the future looks for this team. They have the leading player in passing yards, receiving yards, and sacks through 3 games and have nothing to show for it. I know everyone likes to get their jokes in about Kirk Cousins, but if this team was 2-1 or 3-0 like they could be, he would be in the MVP conversation at the moment. He is playing some of the best football of his career and has over 1,000 passing yards and 9 passing touchdowns through the first 3 games. And my concern for the future is the interior offensive line, of course, but if you have a player doing this much through 3 games and you can't pull out a single win, what does that say about the rest of your team? And I'm not talking about the Justin Jeffersons or Danielle Hunters. I mean everyone else. And granted, the Vikings' ground game did pick up in week 3 as they ran for 130 yards as a team, which was by far a season high as they totaled just 69 rushing yards through the first 2 games of the year. And this is one of the major concerns I have with them moving forward. Yes, they have some big name players like Justin Jefferson, Christian Darrisaw, Danielle Hunter. Hell, you can toss Kirk in there because of how he's played so far. But after that and even a few other names, it's brutal. The defense is 26th in yards allowed through the first 3 games and 26th in points allowed through the first 3 games, which is worrisome because this was a unit that was supposed to improve. Brian Flores is the defensive coordinator, and I don't want to fully throw him under the bus because at the end of the day, he is the defensive coordinator and you have to work with what you're given, at least in his position, and from a talent standpoint, this defense is bad. The secondary specifically is brutal, and I think this is the start of the Harrison Smith decline. He is 34 going on 35, and Harrison isn't the only player in the secondary by any means either, but young corner Caleb Evans and Byron Murphy get picked on quite a bit, and it especially showed in week 3 as Keenan Allen was on his way to an 18-catch, 215-yard performance. And to go back to the title of the video of the future scaring me for what this team could be in the next few years, this team spent their first 2 picks of the Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell regime on secondary. Neither of those players selected were Harrison Smith, Caleb Evans, or Byron Murphy. Their first-round pick in 2022 was Lewis Cine, who was acquired through a trade back, and I know a lot of Vikings fans criticize Kwesi for making this trade back as they passed on Ravens safety Kyle Hamilton, who will probably be a multiple-time Pro Bowler, and at some point, hell, maybe even this year, an All-Pro. And I'm not getting into the discussion of what should have been done with this pick because hindsight is always 2020, but what I will say is how bad is Lewis Cine and Andrew Booth to the point where they're not even playing in a defense that ranks, again, 26th in yards allowed and 26th in points allowed through 3 games. Cine and Booth have not played a defensive snap in 2023 and have solely been used on special teams. And I understand not every pick is going to be a hit, nor am I claiming every pick should be a hit. But to start the regime with what looks to be a year and 3 games in, with 2 draft busts, is awful. And there's no way around it. Lewis broke his leg in week 4 of his rookie season, and you can't do anything about that. But here we are now at 0-3, and in his career, he's played 2 defensive snaps. And when you essentially punt on an entire draft, that's going to mess a lot of things up. It would mess things up even for the most successful franchises, let alone where the Vikings currently are. Their 3rd pick of the 2022 draft was guard Ed Ingram, who allowed 11 sacks in his rookie year, which of course was near the top of the league and hasn't improved in 2023. And their 4th pick in the 2022 draft was linebacker Brian Asamoah, who I thought had starting level potential but has played just 16 defensive snaps through 3 games this year. And sure, undrafted rookie Ivan Pace has played great, and I'm happy for Ivan. But what's that say about absolutely whiffing on your first 4 picks of the 2022 draft in what were 4 draft picks inside the top 66 overall selections? And just for clarity on one thing, I'm not calling for Kwesi's job 20 games into the regime, as much as it is to say his seat is getting a little warm, because his job, which is to acquire talent and to help this team win games in the long run, has not come close to achieving this goal. And the situation with Kirk, to me, is crystal clear. He's in his final however many games with the Vikings, and I think he'll move on at the end of the year. And that's not a hot take, as a lot of people think this, but that brings up the question of who's next. And the 2024 draft class is strong at the quarterback position, and chances are the Vikings probably will draft a rookie quarterback next year. But here's my fear for this team, because this is exactly how I see the 2023 season playing out. They're 0-3 at the moment, and obviously that's not fun, especially with how they've lost. But reasonably speaking, they could easily be 2-1 and go into Carolina next week and come out 3-1. But they're not. And the Vikings schedule isn't all that difficult, and there's a span where they could easily pick up 6 or 7 wins in an 8-game span. And what's that going to do? Win enough games so they're pushed out of one of the top 3 guys, who I presume to be at this point Caleb Williams, Drake May, and Michael Penix. So now we're in a situation with the GM whose seat is getting warm and has to do something because his first draft class looks to be an absolute flop, and he has to do something to keep his job. So where would that put us in the timeline? You guessed it, trade 2 or even 3 first-round picks, or 2 first-round picks and a pick swap to go up and get your quarterback of the future. And I know you have to have a quarterback in today's NFL to seriously compete, and I'm not suggesting they should bring back Teddy Bridgewater or sign Baker Mayfield or whoever to try and right the ship. But even if they get their quarterback in the first round of the draft next year, we now have a question of whether this guy is going to pan out, because like we saw in 2021, 2 out of the top 3 picks did not, and 3 out of the 5 first-round picks did not pan out, and Mac Jones isn't exactly a superstar either. And how all of this plays into the Vikings' future concerning me is they have a one-of-one player that has not been paid in receiver Justin Jefferson. And Justin is 24 years old and had the most receiving yards of any player through their first 3 seasons. Ever. And if he stays healthy for the rest of the year, it'll be the most through the first 4 years, as he already has 3 games of at least 149 yards receiving this year. And having said that, do you think Justin wants to sit through a rebuild? What if the Vikings draft the next Zach Wilson in this scenario? And this is all with the team that has serious holes like we mentioned on the defense. And if there's been anything shown through the first 3 games of the 2023 season, this team is not a quarterback away from going to the Super Bowl. No rookie quarterback next year is going to outplay Kirk in terms of what he's done through the first 3 games this year. Their interior offensive line is terrible. Their defense isn't good and is aging, by the way, and they have no long-term solution at quarterback. And arguably the best non-quarterback in football has not been paid, and if you are Justin going through this, knowing you only have one shot at your NFL career, you don't want to waste 3 years of your prime just trying to get back to the playoffs. And another thing that concerns me with the Vikings is head coach Kevin O'Connell himself. The way the situation was handled at the end of the Chargers game in week 3 was unacceptable, period. And what I think is extremely frustrating is this is at most a 2-minute conversation that KOC can have with Kirk Cousins entering the week. Hell, any week, not just week 3. It can be as simple as, hey Kirk, if we have no timeouts and we're driving in a situation, here's what we're going to do. And even a 2-minute conversation may be overestimating how long this would take. And to rush into this play with not only the game on the line, but effectively the season on the line, because there's a big difference between 1-2 and 0-3, is ridiculous. You can say Kirk should have spiked the ball in that situation and made the command decision to spike the ball, and I wouldn't be upset. But I think this scenario, in terms of how this played out, is how the rest of the Viking season will play out. And what's important to remember from this week 3 loss specifically is Brandon Staley did everything he could to hand this game to the Vikings. He did everything to say, hey guys, please take this win, I don't want to coach for the Chargers anymore, because ultimately I think he would have been fired had they lost this game. Within this game, Justin Herbert completed 85% of his passes, as he was 40 of 47 and threw for over 400 yards, and the game still came down to the final play. And the Vikings, of course, lost. And the type of loss carries over because I truly think that's a season-altering loss. Yes, the Vikings will simply out-talent some teams down the stretch, and they're not going to go 1-16 or 2-15 or anything crazy like that, but again, this goes back to the future scaring me. They've lost games they shouldn't have, and now they're going to win meaningless games, which will cost them future draft capital. And within this, you have to pay a star receiver, a franchise left tackle, and a pass rusher, all while trying to get the quarterback situation figured out, and all while trying to improve what is a bad roster outside of a few positions. I do think they'll win in Carolina in week 4, but 2 of their next 3 games after that are against the Chiefs and against the 49ers, and this team is, especially with the 49ers, not in the same class. And what's important to remember for the Vikings and their future is they're not a single offseason away from seriously competing, meaning competing for a Super Bowl. Offensively speaking, with JJ, TJ, and Jordan Addison, they can keep up with a lot of teams scoring, but the defense will continuously let them down, especially when they play the elite teams. But with no run game to speak of and their running backs themselves not being great by any means, the Vikings are left in this weird situation where they can't really chew the clock like they would like to be able to, so Kirk essentially has to go win them games. Every game. The Vikings offense ranks 29th in average time of possession per drive, which is not great, obviously, because it keeps your defense on the field longer and you want your defense rested as late into the game as you can. You don't want them on their 80th play of the game early in the 4th quarter. And what also concerns me with the future of the Vikings is in 2 of the 3 games they've played, the opposing offense has done what they've wanted to do with the defense not being able to slow them down. Whether it was the Eagles on their way to rushing for over 250 yards in week 2, or the Chargers throwing for 445 yards as a team in week 3, because Keenan Allen also had a passing touchdown in this game, there's no slowing anybody down in sight for Minnesota. And again, this goes back to Kwesi acquiring talent, and this team is suffering from whiffing on damn near an entire draft. It would be very beneficial for them if they had a first-round safety playing at a first-round safety's level, or a second-round corner playing at a second-round corner's level. But nope, they're on the bench because the coaches don't think they're good enough to play. And what's going to be the most frustrating thing for the 2023 Vikings is at some point, they're going to clean up the turnovers. At least not where they're averaging 3 turnovers per game. And within this stretch between weeks 4 to the bye week, they can win almost every game aside from the Chiefs and Niners, which I do think they will lose. And I know you may think they'll lose to Green Bay or New Orleans or whoever, but remember, this team is arguably 2 drives away from being 2-1, and their top talent is playing great football, and they're going to win more games than you think. And my biggest fear is they finish 8-9, finish with the 15th overall draft pick, and have to give up their next 2 first-round picks to go up and have a chance at the quarterback of the future, while not being able to fill out a lot of other holes on their roster. And that's what scares me with the Minnesota Vikings. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 23% of people watching are subscribed and makes a massive difference. My Patreon and Twitter links are in the description if you'd like to support the channel, and until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.